Welcome into the debut of HuskerMax Today. I am Kaleb Henry. Super excited to be doing this with HuskerMax and of course Nick Handley over there. And Nick, you've been rolling out the Nick Handley show on the HuskerMax YouTube page. Now we've got HuskerMax Today, and this is going to be a fun one. We'll be going from 9 to 10 Mondays and Thursdays. I know I'm super excited about this. Haven't been doing kind of regular content since I left KLIN back before the football season, and you've just been rolling out content kind of all the time everywhere you've been, Nick. I'm super happy to be doing this with you.
Oh, likewise, man. I'm excited. I've always appreciated your work too. I know it's going to be a lot of complimenting back and forth here in this entire first hour. I appreciated you guys reaching out after my time at 1620 was over, and it's been a great relationship. And as we know, covering especially Husker athletics, there's just no slow period. And that's where it's very appropriate that we leap from that exact thought today.
Yeah, so we were going to talk about some Nebraska basketball because massive win yesterday. Women were on the road as well, falling at Indiana. We'll get to that. We're going to have to push that back just a hair because massive transfer news yesterday and massive news this morning, first reported by On3, and I'm seeing everyone else report it and get confirmations. Mike Ekeler, former Husker assistant, native Nebraskan from David City, played at Kansas State, was a national special teams player of the year, and turned Tennessee's special teams over the last 4 years into a juggernaut from what they were. Mike Ekeler now coming to Nebraska to lead the Husker special teams. Nick, just right away, that's less than an hour old. What were your thoughts seeing all of that pop up?
I mean, how can you not think about ABT all about technique and then ABM all about money? And that is his directives to the special teams. When you think of it, Kaleb, you think of high energy. And that's how he was with Bo. That's how he was at Nebraska. That's how he's been with Josh Heupel at Tennessee too, it is that energy. And whether we're talking about NFL special teams coordinators or in college, aren't some of the very best ones borderline psychotic? Because and he does got that gene where he's the one guy that wants to be running from goal line to goal line and following everything on a dead sprint. And this is where I think about special teams. And look, there's a lot about what plagued Nebraska from a special team standpoint. And this year it was the operation. In previous years, we've seen certain guys in the specialty position, whether we're talking about kick returners, punt returners, the kicking game, whatever it is. So there's a lot of different things. And I know this is going to sound probably like the most cliche thing when we talk about either defense or special teams, but you have to start with that type of energy level. You have to start with something that is going to draw guys that are either playing on the offensive side of the football or the defensive side of the football to come over and want to be part of that third phase, and not only be part of that third phase, but be effective in that third phase, to be able to make plays, to get excited about special teams. So I think it starts at the top with who you're getting your orders from, who you are getting those directives from. And again, that's why I bring up his motto, the all about technique and getting all about money. There's just something right now with Mike Ekeler when we knew that Ed Foley, and that was inevitable. That was maybe one of the worst kept secrets, is that Ed Foley is not going to be overseeing special teams, even when that announcement hadn't come, that they needed some type of a jump start. And the name Mike Ekeler was being thrown around because of his connection to Nebraska, not only as being a former coach here, but I mean, the guy got started at Omaha Skutt Catholic in 1999, still got family here. So it just seemed like this was a perfect time for him to return for what Nebraska needed out of a special teams coordinator, but also what apparently it sounds like in Mike Ekeler's life of wanting to be back closer to home and closer to family.
Well, and that's one of those things that I go both ways on it. Whenever there's a position opening or potentially opening, and the names that get thrown around all have to have Husker connections. I'm like, well, they don't, but I understand when it's someone who's good at what they do and they have that itch to come home type of a thing. So this is one of them where it's like, yeah, you know what? That absolutely makes sense in what he's doing. Like you said, he got his coaching start at Skutt, just up the road. The family is here. He's from David City. There are so many things that just make sense. And of course, the fact that he coached here before, what do Husker fans dive into first? Okay, who's been here? Who either played here or who coached here? And those were, you think about some of the best defensive teams that Nebraska has had. And no, he wasn't like the defensive coordinator, but he was coaching linebackers. those were some of the best defensive teams of the 21st century. Of course, you've got Ndamukong Suh, and this is talking guys up front, and you've got Jared Crick, but also he coached Levante David.
Right.
You know, like he coached a number of guys, Cody Glenn, Philip Dillard, Eric Martin, Will Compton.
Yep.
These are Husker dudes who didn't just have success here, but went on to have playing careers in the NFL. And that's one of the things that you've seen Matt Rhule want out of his coaches, is that it's not just about having success at Nebraska, developing what you're going to do at Nebraska. It's about developing and getting to the league. And he continued that after Nebraska as well, Nick. Like that's what you're getting out of this coach, in that hopefully he's going to take those special teams and he'll take starters, because you're going to be down to 105. So it's not just who's just on special teams. And I know Rhule has been trying to get that more. That's its own interesting conversation now that it jumps into my head. But getting those starters to go carve out an additional role on special teams, because that helps them get to the league.
Well, and it doesn't it also, I find it interesting in a time of dramatic change in college football. We just listened to Matt Rhule on Saturday talk about one of the main reasons that they are going to get away from a traditional spring game. And we all thought it was because of the 105, and it really isn't. It's because of the whole tampering situation, that in this dramatic landscape change of college football, and you look at some of the old brand name college football programs, Nebraska being one of them, that are trying to get back to the top. Isn't Tennessee one of those teams that Nebraska's trying to be, again, very similar to? Because Tennessee, they lost their way for a while. And then Josh Heupel, give them credit, they were able to find their way back up. That this is also a coach, not only with what he brings from a special team standpoint, but how to navigate all of that change for a guy that's been a part of that at a very high level program. You know, we're not talking about a guy that was at a Power Four, or I'm sorry, a Group of Four conference where maybe the NIL wasn't as rampant, maybe the demand and everything, the access to the players wasn't as rampant. I mean, you were at freaking Tennessee. So you understand, in this changing landscape of college football, at a program like Tennessee that is right there in the middle of it, that was still able to thrive, take advantage of the resources that they've had, and be able to make successful players in those phases. That, to me, is probably one of the areas that's not going to be discussed as much about Mike Ekeler, but gives me personally some comfort that he's coming from a program that Nebraska's trying to be at that level right now too, and seeing that there was nothing about what his operation, anything that he was a part of, that you would go into Nebraska and all of a sudden be, wow, this is just too overwhelming. Boy, there's a lot of demand on these players. Boy, there's a lot of access that these fans want on these players. No, because it's the exact same thing over at Tennessee. Nope, I think we lost Kaleb. We're going to keep going. But anyway, the Mike Ekeler news, it is huge. It is absolutely one of those things right now that when you think of what Nebraska needs from a standpoint of the coaching staff, and Matt Rhule now only going into his third year, you look at some very interesting changes on that coaching staff. Of course, we all remember what happened midseason, where you get Dana Holgorsen, where the overall, it wasn't enough to just maybe get through the rest of the season with Marcus Satterfield as the OC calling the plays. There was a problem that was identified by the coach, and he went the unconventional route, and that is make change right away, bring someone in from the outside, and to do that. And then we knew, okay, obviously the writing's on the wall that if he's willing to make that type of change, he's going to be making the change at special teams coordinator at some point. When, and maybe more importantly, now we know the answer, who is going to represent that change would be obviously a big topic. So now you look at Dana Holgorsen, a very well-respected offensive mind that is part of this coaching staff, that is part of this new era of Nebraska football in that offense for Dylan Rhule. But now all of a sudden, so you go from Dana Holgorsen, very well-known commodity. Then as of today, you look at special teams, which was such a need for Nebraska to improve. And you didn't just bring in anybody. You brought in Mike Ekeler. So Kaleb, as you're getting reconnected, I was just reminding people, this coaching staff, just going into the third year, it's taken a pretty dramatic change, but it's taken a dramatic change with two very well-known commodities in some very important positions. And that's also not to mention some of the new assistants that's come along with Dana Holgorsen, and what I'm assuming will be, because of the unlimited staff and unlimited analysts that you can have now, what I'm sure Mike Ekeler might say, hey, this guy or these couple guys can help us as well in our special teams operations.
Wouldn't feel like a debut if the internet didn't absolutely die. It just phenomenal. I was like, of course we are. We're not even 10 minutes in. Still super excited to figure all this out with HuskerMax Today. You're right, though, because not even like a year ago, you're going just the changes since like November, you know? And when Dana Holgorsen comes in and it's, here are the things that I'm seeing you do correctly. Here are the things that I'd like to see changed. All the other assistant positions that you have, some because they opened up with guys leaving, but others because you wanted to make changes. Sometimes you ask people to leave so that you can make those changes. I really like that you're going to have multiple people on the staff that aren't going to just be yes men to Matt Rhule. Like, he's able to oversee all of it, but they have experience running super successful operations, whether they were head coaches, whether they were coordinators, whether they've worked with Rhule in the past or not, whether they've been at Nebraska in the past or not. These guys have all had success. And to come in and mix all of those egos, mix all of that experience and say, now you're running this operation in a different way that no one else has ever had to run because of the roster limits, because of revenue sharing, because of the way NIL and the transfer portal have evolved over the last few years. It's nice to have those guys that can come in like Mike Ekeler now and say, I've been at a place that's been successful. Here's what I'm seeing work. You guys are doing this. That hasn't worked where I've been. Let's change that operation a little bit. And I know we'll get to Matt Rhule and his comments from Saturday's press conference a little bit later, but how much can Mike Ekeler come in and upend the operation that was largely, I don't know, a lot of the blame went to the long snapper. Right. But it's not like Nebraska has had a punt returner doing anything in a long time. It hasn't had a kick returner with a whole lot of success in a long time. Like, are the expectations that Eckler's going to come in and upend that too?
It's a good question, because the highlights of what Tennessee was able to do, they were able to wreak havoc in the special teams game in a good way too. I mean, they're blocking punts, they're blocking kicks, they're able to get some return yardage. But I go back to what that moniker, that all about technique, the attention to detail, I think is going to be huge. And I had a tough time believing, Kaleb, that Ed Foley did not have that attention to detail for a guy that has as much experience. So whatever the disconnect there was, maybe we'll never know. But it always seemed like this was a group that just wasn't as prepared as they should be. That operation is what it was. But there were times that other teams scouting Nebraska, whether it was on punt coverage or whether it was on punt team, that they would be able to identify a weak spot and they would exploit it for Nebraska. So having that attention to detail, I think, is absolutely where you start with Mike Ekeler. And I think just having that attention to detail to where you're seeing that every Saturday, where Nebraska's third phase looks like it's extremely prepared, to me, that's going to go a long way. Now, there is the kicking game, and give John Hull some credit. I think once he finally settled down, he became somewhat of a reliable person that you could, at least inside of 40 yards, that you could say, all right, I feel okay about this. So there's still a lot of improvement individually that needs to take place. And I'd be a fool to say, well, Mike Ekeler is going to solve all of that. But I do think the entire operation, which is what let Nebraska down this last year, I think people should expect for that to look dramatically better because of the energy, the attention to detail, and just the overall track record of it. And you bring up something real quickly about Matt Rhule too, of not surrounding himself with yes men. And that was, if there was one thing that I would always pick at when it came to the Bo Pelini era, is I always felt like Bo came across as a guy that wanted to be challenged, but when it came down to it, he didn't want to be. He wanted it to be the way he saw it. And, okay, yeah, I heard you, but we're still going to do things my way. Very stubborn, which I'm sure a lot of head coaches are. It's the ones that can run their program with the vision that they have in mind, but also be open to other ways to execute that vision. Matt Rhule, as we've heard now over the last couple of years, he's not the easiest guy to work with. He's very demanding, and that needs to be the case. That's a good thing. But just because you're very demanding doesn't mean you're not open for suggestions or you're not open for guys in the room to also be able to challenge you. And I think there is a good blend of that with Matt Rhule, and I think he's shown that with the guys that he has continued to hire and bring on staff. So again, when you put the totality of all of that, especially with this Mike Ekeler hire, given his track record, and also given the fact that he's not just going to sit there and be quiet and be like, "Oh, coach, whatever you want me to do, I'm going to do." That's not Mike Ekeler's DNA, and I don't think that's why they brought him here. I think they knew exactly what they're going to get out of Mike Ekeler, and I think Phil Snow and Matt Rhule said, "Yep, if we can get this guy, let's get him because this guy is going to bring fresh perspective in an area that we need that."
Just because you said it in there. How many times did we hear Tony White over the last month of the season say, "Well, it's what Rhule wants. He's the guy in charge. It's what," and it was like, "Well, you're on your way out. Like you're not happy with how anything's going." Before we get to the second quarter, another change or another addition that the Huskers got. Rocco Spindler, the offensive lineman from Notre Dame, played in the national title game, played all of the games this year. That was an NFL schedule for him. Grad transfer coming to Nebraska. It's another offensive line addition for the Big Red out of the transfer portal on top of a whole bunch of experience coming back. Nick, I like it. You're getting guys that are going to come in, and it was a unit that I thought played better last year than they had the year before. We've seen improvement under Donovan Raiola, but when you can go get a guy like this to bolster what you've got for your young stud quarterback, to give them time to open up holes for all of your other weapons, it's nice to have him.
There's this ridiculous stat out there right now, just north of 1,300 snaps for Rocco Spindler, where he allowed a sack twice. The percentage, his fail rate. Oh my gosh! If I had that type of fail rate, we'd be jet setting wherever we wanted to do this show right now. But that is phenomenal. And this is the difference between finding guys from Power 4 football programs at any position, whether we're talking offensive line, defensive line, skilled position, whatever it be, when you can add the experience and then you also take it to another level to where you add the experience that they've had as playing every snap in the college football playoff, but also playing in those championship settings, playing in those high leverage moments where you're going up against the very best of the best across the line from you and you're holding your own. Those are the types of guys that can translate where it's okay for fan bases. And I don't care whether we're talking about Nebraska or any fan that gets those types of players and say, "Hey, you know what? I don't care that I need to be cautious. We never know how it's going to go." I'm truly excited about that person. The Rocco Spindler news I thought was huge, just like the Elijah Pritchett one was great because, Kaleb, if you look at this offensive line, this is an area that we've always wanted to say, maybe this year it all comes together because there's a lot of familiar faces there. Maybe it'll all click. Maybe they'll all that cohesiveness that Donovan Riley talks about. Maybe that'll all be there this year. Well, now all of a sudden you can put not one but two proven commodities, one on the interior and then one at tackle, in much needed positions of need for Nebraska. Then on top of it, you can look at guys that, in my opinion, since they've gotten here, have gotten better. Justin Evans being one of those guys. If he's going to slide over to center, I'm really interested to see what some of those younger guys look like too, like the Grant Bricks that was on the 2 deep at the end of the year. A guy like Sam Sledge, Preston Tuamoa, who is now ready to shed that red shirt, and we'll see what he can do too. Adding depth, and this is another one. I was talking about this last night too. This is another one that I know people will roll their eyes at when I bring up Turner Corcoran. They're like, "Well, haven't we seen enough of Turner Corcoran?" What if Turner Corcoran is in a position where he doesn't have to help you right away? He doesn't have to have the weight of the world at left tackle, where he can be a depth piece. There again, you go with the amount of starts, the amount of reps he's had in games. Isn't that a luxury to have? So all of a sudden, we're talking about some proven guys at both Alabama and Notre Dame, on top of some developmental guys, but also guys that have played a lot of snaps that don't necessarily have to be your day one starters, but can be a depth piece. I'm still not going to say it here early February that offensive line is going to be a strength of Nebraska, but gosh dang it, we are close to being able to say that for the first time, in my opinion, in a very long time.
If it just continues to take a step forward, last year was better than the year before. If this fall is better than this past fall, then I like the direction it's going for a lot of those guys. Bring in a stud bringing a star on the line, where if you're playing college football 25, he's got a star under him. He's that guy. Let the other guys have their roles. They know what they're supposed to do. And as we transition, that's something that you saw Nebraska men's basketball do over the last couple of games. It's guys knowing what their roles were, that they weren't executing that over the 6-game losing streak. Get a win at home, ranked Illinois. Win on the road, ranked Oregon last night in Eugene, 77-71, trailed for 46 total seconds over the last 85 minutes of game time, Nick. This team, whether it's Bryce Williams saying, I'm going to go be an alpha, it's Juwan Gary saying, I'm going to get to the rim, I'm not shooting threes. Yep. Coming off the bench, Raleigh Wooster hitting some mid-range shots, goes 4 for 4 yesterday from the field. It feels like the roles got figured out. Unfortunately, it took a 6-game run or 6-game losing streak against some really tough competition, but back-to-back games have this team squarely back in the NCAA tournament conversation.
No doubt. And I'm going to throw another name in there because it was 7 minutes and that's it of action that he saw. But this goes a little bit to your point of guys figuring out some roles. And for a while we were thinking, okay, Nebraska needs that instant offense. So if you're looking at the post position, would it make more sense to see a guy like Andrew Morgan starting the game and no longer seeing Braxton Mia? Well, all of a sudden, Braxton Mia is a DNP for the last 2 games. And you're thinking he's going to have to play again at some point. And Andrew Morgan gets into foul trouble last night. Braxton Mia has to come in. Immediately has an impact, creates a turnover, gets an offensive rebound. I know his plus minus was still in the negative, but 7 minutes of Braxton Mia where he looked completely engaged. He didn't look like the 2 previous games where he had no role whatsoever affected him in a negative way. He seemed still very much connected to this team. Just 7 minutes of a guy that you needed those minutes to give you more good than bad while Andrew Morgan is on the bench. That was a big moment for what I think for their front court last night too. You mentioned the one guy that I think was the difference because Bryce Williams and Brad Underwood said this after the Illinois game. Bryce Williams is the best player on the floor between the 2 teams, and it wasn't even close. Yeah. And I think we'd all agree on that. You look at Bryce Williams, what he did last night, he's the leading scorer in this game with 28 points. Without what Juwan Gary did, Nebraska does not win this game. Juwan Gary was relentless. Juwan Gary did not hesitate. Juwan Gary was not overthinking anything. When he got it, he went. When any time that Oregon tried to claw back into that deficit, I think at one point it was a 4-point lead for Nebraska.
He got as close as 4, yeah.
Yep. And then what happens immediately? Juwan Gary gets out in transition and he gets right to the rim in a split second. And so all of a sudden, Oregon's feeling themselves and they're excited. Okay, now it's technically a 1-possession game if you get the 3 and 1, and then he makes it a 2-possession game just like that. So there were just moments when Juwan Gary was able to capitalize that I thought were timely, extremely timely. He finishes with 23 points. He even gets the corner 3 too for good measure, but his relentless and just non-hesitation in everything he was doing, especially on the offensive end, but also getting some big defensive rebounds too. To me, he was the guy last night.
Juwan Gary, 23 points, 5 rebounds. Bryce Williams, 28 points, 7 boards, 6 assists. And the 2 of them, because they're a tandem in so many of these when the team is having success or the lack thereof, they shot 16 for 28 together from the field, 16 of 19 at the free throw line. The team made 7 free throws in the last 50 seconds. Not a single one of those guys, by the way, went to the line twice.
Yeah.
So you had like Bryce went, shot 2. I think it was Connor went and shot 2. Maybe Juwan, and I know Raleigh missed one, but you weren't sending the same guy there. Like Creighton, it's great. Get the ball to Stephen Ashworth and let him shoot 1,000 free throws. Nebraska wasn't able to do that against the press. They kept taking someone away. Every one of those guys was going in, cashing their free throws at the end. Over that losing streak, that was when Nebraska shot its poorest free throws.
Yeah.
Early in the year, it was nice. Get to the free throw line and kind of extend things. Nebraska shot more than 20 free throws yesterday. It was really nice to see those guys all carve out, here's what our role. And then defensively, to go in and Nate Biddle, all 8'8" of him, or however big he is, working on his board, he's 33. That is a big dude. But what did what is Nebraska's defense designed to do? They're designed to say you're running through your post player.
Yep.
And not that Biddle's going to light up the scoreboard. He was Oregon's leading scorer going into the game, but he finished with a plus minus of minus 23. Mm-hmm. And Nebraska's defense did exactly what it was designed to do. Clog up the paint, play underneath the big man. And Oregon couldn't hit a three. Nebraska couldn't hit a three either. Both teams shot garbage from beyond the arc.
Yeah.
But for Nebraska to go in and say, you're going to make only a few threes, you're going to shoot sub 20% from deep, and you're never going to really be threatened in this game.
Well, they completely capitalize off of, and really picked up from where they left off against Illinois with their perimeter defense. And when I think of the matchup inside with Biddle, very similar to how they were able to rotate, collapse down, but then recover successfully like they did against Creighton, where Ryan Kalkbrenner was an absolute non-factor in that game. And Creighton had looks. They missed a lot of shots on the perimeter, but you can't say that those shots were uncontested. Nebraska was able to rotate back out, and they did a good job of that against Illinois. They did a great job against Oregon last night too, where you saw them crashing in. They were making it tough in the paint, but then they were able to recover in time. That energy level that you saw this defense playing with was huge. And making what did Illinois have, like 40? I think they attempted 42 3-point shots in that game earlier.
Yeah, Illinois attempted 42. Yeah,
42 3-point shots, and all of those. I mean, you're seeing either fadeaways. They were never able to really set up and shoot that confidently.
Setbacks on a lot of them, yeah.
So the closeouts were a lot better, a lot more crisp. I think Fred has found a rotation that definitely works for him. But the other part is I was impressed last night with Nebraska. Again, offensively, it's not crisp. I don't know if it ever will be when Nebraska is feeling like they're playing some of their better basketball. There's going to be moments where it just looks clunky. You mentioned just both teams beyond the arc. Nebraska only 4 of 23. And really their field goal percentage was not that great. Just like against Illinois, it wasn't that great, which I think is a good thing. That shows Nebraska doesn't have to be this offensive juggernaut to beat teams. If they can play in the mud with these teams, they like being there, and they don't necessarily have to shoot lights out. But what they did to TJ Bamba as well, getting TJ Bamba in some very tough positions defensively to where he had to commit some fouls. I thought also getting him in foul trouble, because TJ Bamba is an athlete. That's a guy that can get going. He can spurn whatever Oregon and Dana Altman want to do there too. So there was just, I think, some smart play along the way between what they did defensively. You mentioned getting to the free throw line, that I think was huge. You had two of your alphas that were taken over in the game. But I thought Nebraska, when they needed to go at certain players, especially when TJ Bamba was in foul trouble, I thought they just played very smart, and they did that.
Yeah, Bamba, extremely physical. I was happy to see him foul out, because offensively, he was able to bully people. Nebraska hasn't necessarily handled being bullied over the last month really well. But fortunately, the officials blew the whistle on a number of those. Yeah. I thought he could have had like 3 more offensive fouls, if anything. How's about this, though? Because you've gone back-to-back ranked wins. Nebraska now up to 4 wins over ranked teams. That ties a school record for the most ranked wins on a season. The last time it happened was in the 98-99 season. It also happened in 93-94 and 90-91. It has not happened in 26 years that Nebraska has had 4 wins over ranked opponents. And that includes last year, where you were able to storm the court against Purdue and against Wisconsin, a couple of top 5 teams. Purdue obviously was the number 1 team in the country. For everything that was that 6-game losing streak, Nick, now it's like, God, they're all the way back. Everything is in front of them. They're favored in the majority of the games that they have remaining on the schedule. None of the teams are currently ranked. Next one is a 9:30 Central tip in Seattle against Washington and old friend William Breidenbach. But when you look at this team now, for where things were a week ago to where they are now, the confidence is just there on even from a fan base of going, yeah, it is all out in front of this team for them.
Well, I was worried about this trip. The Illinois game, they had to have it. They needed to experience a win. Okay, I think that goes without saying. So we know that. But after that, then going on the road, what was it, late February of last year when they got their first conference road victory? And I believe that was against Indiana.
Yeah, it was on the road. Yeah.
And they
Late.
finished with 2, but yeah, it was late. And we were always wondering, can they win on the road? And so you get that in the early part of February, which is great. But more importantly, they handled success the way you should. You beat Illinois, a top 25 win. Hey, you know what? College basketball, it allows you to do so. And so what do you do after that? How do you take that and handle success the right way, which this team hasn't always done, especially when they're going on the road. So they checked a couple of major boxes here in just the last handful of days of getting a significant top 25 win against a good Illinois team, but then going on the road. And even though Oregon is fighting it a little bit, they're still a top 25 team. And what that team did early in the season, their resume, that is still a very good win. So to be able to do that, if they can take care of business against Washington, again, a team that's struggling, but it is on the road, so you don't assume anything. You're right. That schedule, all of a sudden you're coming home, back-to-back games. You got a game on Super Bowl Sunday at home, and then you don't play till I think Thursday, but at home as well.
Yeah.
This is a good area where Nebraska does set itself up for a possible run where they could really eliminate that 6-game losing streak just like that if they can take care of business. But the big question right now, Kaleb, and I don't know where I stand on this, do you trust them to take care of business in these games that I think obviously they'll be favored? I'm not ready to say I do. This was a huge 2-game stretch for them, and they've got some very good opportunities in front of them, but I don't have a full grasp of this team just yet.
14-8 on the year, and now up to 4-7 in the Big Ten Conference, squarely in we got to remind everyone, only 15 out of the 18 make the Big Ten tournament. So that is where, after the 6-game losing streak, it was play your way into the Big Ten tournament and then take it from there. 2 games in, you've played your way into the tournament. Now you take it from there with a lot of basketball left to be played at Washington Wednesday. And then it is home with Ohio State and Maryland, at Northwestern and Penn State, home with Michigan and Minnesota, at Ohio State, home on March 9th to close out the regular season against Iowa. You look through the fact that you have 9 games left. And last thought here on Nebraska men's basketball, but 9 games left, and you're at 14 wins. If you win 5 and you're at 19 wins, I still feel like with the resume compared against other bubble teams, 19 with this resume feels really good. 20 obviously feels better, but this team is in a good place to be at 19 going into the Big Ten tournament. Try to grab a game there and then go into Selection Sunday with a lot of confidence.
Most times I would say 20 is the number, but you bring up the key factor, and that is the ranked opponents that they've beaten. So now you've got the resume of the wins and the quality wins that you have. That's why you're going to continue to hear people until Nebraska plays next of the first time in 26 years that they beat 4 ranked opponents, because that actually does matter when it comes to resumes. And so if you're going to erase that 6-game losing streak and put yourself on the good conversation of the bubble, you've got to do exactly what Nebraska did. Now you're in that danger zone of you're not going to gain as much of what you just did these last 2 games when it comes to your resume. It can only hurt you, and you could take a big fall if you lose. But the good news is these are games that, given the types of games that you've won, you should be able to go out and collect a handful of wins there. So I would think 19, they would be in good standing when it does come to the amount of wins that they have, but also the quality of wins that they have in that stretch. Now everybody needs to be big fans of Oregon. Everybody needs to be big fans of UCLA, and you need to be a big fan of Illinois as well. And I'm not going to throw out Creighton there.
I was going to say, don't say it, but we get it. But we get it.
Yeah.
It makes the win look that much better that you can point to 2 ranked wins on the road this year, not just beating ranked teams at home, but doing so on the road. Welcome to the Big Ten, or welcome back to Nebraska, Dana Altman. Think about that, getting wins over Creighton and Dana Altman in the same year.
Yep.
Not a lot of teams, just because there's not a lot of crossover, but not a lot of teams get a chance to do that.
Not at all. All
right, on Saturday, Matt Rhule met with the media for the first time in what felt like forever, because that was the longest January in the history of ever. But a lot of news out of Saturday. Obviously, he talked about special teams. We learned just a couple days later that they've nailed that down with the hiring of Mike Ekeler. If you missed any of that at the beginning, go back and that'll be on the podcast. We're getting that to all of the podcast destinations, as well as HuskerMax YouTube and HuskerMax.com. But a lot of talk about John Cook and his recent retirement. There was obviously talk about roster limits and revenue sharing and where everyone with the team is. What stood out to you when listening to Matt Rhule talk for more? It was over a half hour on Saturday at the campus there for UNL.
Honestly, and maybe this shouldn't have surprised me because we haven't seen a lot of guidelines on this, but ultimately the coaching staffs in college football still trying to navigate their upcoming spring ball, having zero idea on how to get that roster down to 105 and ultimately what they want to do with it. I think if Matt Rhule, and he's I think always as candid as any coach is going to be with their fan base and with their press corps, you could tell as he's trying to think through it that they still don't have a lot of concrete guidance on what that's going to happen. And that's nothing against Troy Dannon. I think Troy Dannon is continuing to advocate for his coach and his coaches when it comes to this and the revenue share, that they know it's happening. They know that they're going to be paying players other than just NIL, but exactly what does that look like? Exactly at what point and how they're going to get down to the 105, at what point will they, is still not necessarily set in stone. And look, Matt Rhule even said this himself. Don't woe is me, us coaches, we have the greatest job. And they do. They make a lot of money. They're compensated very well. But I've always said when it went to the having to re-recruit your own team on top of recruiting, and then, oh yeah, now the transfer portal window when you have to do that as well. And this is such a faster expectation level when it comes to brand names like Nebraska, of trying to be as good as this team can be and try to be an 8 or 9 or 10 win team and be in the mix of an expanded playoff, that there's really no excuses, because you do have the ability to radically transform and shape your roster much quicker than you did before because of the transfer portal. But it does seem like, with not a lot of concrete guidance on all this, that it is still sort of flying in the dark on this. I did think, though, when he talked about the 105, the way that he's going to handle it, where they're going to essentially go 57, very similar to the 53-man roster in the NFL, and then what they would do for the last essentially 10, so 95 to 105, would almost have a similar feel to, well, I guess they would fit the profile very similar to what you'd have with a walk-on.
Yeah.
That you don't know if this guy is going to help you, if he's going to maybe eventually make the 2 deep, or if he's just a good culture guy. But and this is why I say it shouldn't have surprised me, because Matt Rhule comes from a walk-on background. He's not doing this because that's the Nebraska thing. You've got to like walk-ons because that's just what Nebraska likes. I think he truly does feel, because this is a guy that's prided himself on developmental type players, where they can identify under-recruited, undervalued type player in high school. They can bring him in, and by maybe 2 years at the training table in the weight room and being in the system, that by their junior year, they can significantly contribute in one of the 3 phases. So I think that was very interesting to see how he broke down, 1 through 57 will be their main contributors. And then after that, you kind of have your duplicates. And then your last 10 are essentially going to be sort of those walk-on role type players, of where we know that maybe they're not going to come into the program right away as proven starters, but we hope to eventually develop them to be guys that can contribute.
Yeah, I like that there's a role still for kind of that kind of player, where they're gonna have to be dynamite in the classroom. You're not taking one of those guys and being like, well, we have to struggle to keep you along and you're not playing.
Yep.
You got to be dynamite in the classroom. You got to be one of the hardest workers on the team, and there has to be potential there. But I like that there is a role for guys who might not be there yet, but they still wanted to go to Nebraska. They didn't want to go to a Division II or an FCS program. They wanted to go to Nebraska because that was the dream. And traditionally, that you became a walk-on guy and you were about 135 on the roster.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's just, that role has now had to shift. And you're right, there's not a lot of guidance. You don't know when you get to July 1 exactly what rev share is going to look like. There's a new administration in Washington. The previous administration on the way out had the Department of Education talk about Title IX. What does Title IX look like now with the new administration? That's about as much politics as we'll dive into, but that does weigh into the way these decisions get made on what the NCAA programs can do. And so there's not a lot of guidance there and trying to re-recruit your own roster. And part of that decision in showcasing your own team, he didn't come out and say canceled. Everyone stopped saying canceled in all of your headlines. He said he highly doubts that there will be a spring game. He didn't cancel spring entirely. There is still likely to be an event, definitely not televised, but there's still likely to be an event. I will say this about the spring game, and this is pre-Matt Rhule even. I'm fine with it. If there is an event going on that is Husker football centric, to get fans here, to get fans into the stadium, that it's tough to get a ticket, both from availability. I know it's 86,000 that are in there, but those prices are not great for families that are more than two deep. It's tough getting to a game. That's sports in general right now. Spring game was that affordable option. $10 a ticket. You guys get in. There's a lot of room. It's most likely not going to be sold out unless it's Scott Frost's first one. That's just what the spring game is. But also, most guys aren't going to play. You might get a quarter of decent football, depending on who the staff is that running it. They're not even tackling. I'm fairly certain, to whatever extent that Matt Rhule highly doubts there will be a spring game, go to the opposite end, and I'm fairly certain that there will be an event for fans to attend. We saw in the fall that there was the 1890 practice to raise money, NIL money. But I'm fine with the spring game, the way it has been constructed the last several years, going away, because I think there's a more valuable way for those guys to use a practice than what we saw in Memorial Stadium.
And this is where I'm glad you brought up quit saying canceled too, because it sounded like, oh my gosh, the first statement that Matt Rhule made before he even fielded questions on Saturday was, I got an announcement to make. We're canceling the spring game. Remember the year that they had to cancel it because of the tornadoes, and we had like the severe weather and everything. It's like all of a sudden he's forecasting really bad weather that day, so we're not even going to risk it. No, you're right. And Troy Dannity even said on his radio hour earlier in the week that there will be an event. We just don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I think the optimism for this program is extremely high. I think 15 helps out a big deal of that as well, with his popularity and the type of guys that they're bringing into this program on top of the guys that are coming back from last year, that there's going to be a lot of optimism and excitement around this program. Whatever football related activities you want to throw out there and fans are able to attend it, I think is going to go over well. Now, are you going to get the 70,000? No, probably not. Now, this is where you do have to be careful with this. Now, this is a problem in college football. This isn't just a Nebraska problem, but what Nebraska does so well, and maybe a handful of other universities, say a Penn State, Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, getting good attendance for their spring games, they're all going to be doing the exact same thing of where they're going to be scaling back whatever type of competition that they would typically treat their fans to. They're going to have to scale that down as well. You got to make sure you're relevant with your fan base, meaning you can't slide back into those 5-win seasons or those 6-win seasons where things seem like they're stuck in the mud, because that on those events, hey, fans come out. This can help our collective. This can help NIL. This can help our overall revenue. Come on out and watch drills, watch skilled competition. That is going to be a tougher sell. That is going to all of a sudden, well, I like to go to see the scrimmage aspect of it, but they're not even doing that. The team isn't very good. So this is where, yes, I understand what they have to do and what they can't do, with the amount of guys they have. And as Matt Rhule said, which this was kind of surprising too, and maybe, again, shouldn't have been, because he's been a big advocate of the whole tampering thing going on in college football, that he hit that point more than he really did about the 105 limit. I think that people just need to understand this is where college football is, but it also puts the pressure on those programs that usually do get a good following, that you got to stay definitely relevant with your program. And that's not just going out there and giving them the song and dance, like your record and your previous season and what you did to try to improve off that previous season. That has to have some substance to it if you want to continue to get the numbers into the stadium for those spring events, whatever it might look like, because I think that's where you start to lose a lot of that interest, where people are like, well, I don't know if they're going to even be that good. I don't really care that much, so I'll check them out in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it'll be a combination of a weekend with Husker baseball and softball and everything going on, and you get the, hey, here's a ticket package for the weekend, and you guys can head over to Haymarket Park, and the football team's going to be over there.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so you make sure you guys can come by, you can see the practice, and for so much whatever, you've got your tickets to get in, which I think it is nice when some of those things are combined, because absolutely fill up Haymarket Park. I know you'll be doing a lot on baseball this year. Baseball is your thing, and they're looking good, but also our good buddy Nate Rohr at KLIN and everything with softball and Jordy Ball being back, and Rhonda Revelle just talked on Saturday. Looking forward to seeing that place packed as much as possible. I do hope, though, because to me, the biggest thing you got out of a spring game was a feel good, no lose, everything's great midway part of the offseason for your fan base. It's tough to replicate that, like you said, with here's some drills and maybe some 7-on-7, and Dylan Raiola slinging it around to Dane Key now, and you get to see some of these guys do something, but you're not in the trenches. You're not Rocco Spindler is new here, run the damn ball and get to go see some smash mouth stuff. You're not getting that. So I'm curious to see what exactly it's going to look like this spring. And we don't have a start date for those spring practices, because it just feels like everything is so different right now, the way college football and college athletics have developed.
Yeah, all we know is that event will be on the 26th, and I'm with you on the year that they've done the spring game, that, okay, you go from Memorial Stadium to Bowlin or to Haymarket. There was a year that they did, I think the Iowa baseball series was at home, and so they had a rare early evening start time for Nebraska versus Iowa baseball. Last year they did it as well, if I remember correctly. They had a home series. Now this year Nebraska will be in Maryland. I'm not sure. I don't have the softball schedule in front of me, but I know Nebraska baseball will be in Maryland for the spring event. But also the other thing that I remember this specifically, because we had just moved to the Bennington area about 3 weeks before it happened. But remember, that was the day after the tornadoes. The spring game last year. And then there was also the one of the years that Scott Frost was the head coach, that the spring game was a couple of weeks after the devastating floods that were taking place too. So the spring game is also represented a little bit of a break in some of the chaos going on in real life, and some tragedies around the state of Nebraska. So, it was a bit of a refuge for a lot of fans. And we all remember that, people were, I think there was some type of donation going on for the tornado relief fund just that day. So I think it's always, and this is where I think this state is so unique to others, is if you have an event that people understand, it's going to gather fans together. They're going to have a chance to at least engage with this football program in some way, shape, or form. And it's all for a good cause. More times than not, the fans are going to show up. But as you get down the road where you're further along with no game, and the team isn't necessarily better than a 6, even 7-win product year in and year out, that's where I think you do run the risk of losing that overall attendance.
April 26th, some event for Husker football. Baseball in Maryland, softball in Washington.
Okay.
Let's go coast to coast with the Huskers that weekend. Jeez, that's going to be all over the place. One last thought on that spring game. That was the launching point for Team Jack, for Jack Hoffman, who just passed this past month. That, like, you think about the things that you do get out of the spring game. Ultimately, that was the launching point. Him with that long run, taking the handoff from Taylor Martinez, being mobbed by the team, everything that was for more than a decade. You don't get that with a spring event as opposed to a spring game. So hopefully it's going to be tough to see something come in and fully replace what that was able to be. More football talk, as we've had some time now to let it all kind of digest. Of course, now Rocco Spindler, who played in the College Football National Championship, coming to Lincoln, but Notre Dame and Ohio State. And then you saw the expanded playoff for the first time in all of its glory. You saw, of course, this same year, expanded SEC and expanded Big Ten. So a few things on just kind of thoughts on how that all went. What for you, Nick, did this get right the most? Like, what absolutely worked with this playoff and all of its expansion?
I think what worked first and foremost, and this is what I expected to work, was the on-campus games. The campus site games were an absolute home run. To see people in South Bend tailgating 3-4 hours post game, that was so cool. They weren't shutting down those lots. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be. I thought that was really cool, and some unique matchups too. Getting the battle of the state of Indiana when you had the Hoosiers being in South Bend. There's that I thought was an absolute home run, and it seemed like at some point we were going to get some close games, and thank God Texas Arizona State delivered. That thing was an absolute insane game. The way that went down, unfortunately, Texas wins that game. But the issue that I see is the inconsistency with the schedule, where you have a week apart. Then you had, the Notre Dame Indiana game was on a Friday, then everything else was on a Saturday. And I understand the holidays, it's tough to navigate, and you don't want to go against the almighty NFL. But you have a week off, then you have a week and a couple of days off, and then it's a week and a half off. We know that the national championship game was one of the lowest viewed collective college football national championships that we've seen, I think, since 2012. Mm-hmm. I think there might have been some fatigue setting in, but I think the inconsistency with the schedule also played into that. And the fact that somehow they had to put a game on the same day as an inauguration. I know that only happens once every 4 years, but you also had college basketball, which that's a big Martin Luther King Day event, where from earlier in the day all the way to the end of the night, you usually have college basketball running almost 24 hours on that day. So you had a lot of reasons to possibly forget about the college football playoff game if you were just a casual viewer. So the schedule itself, I think, was interesting as far as trying to find that consistency. But yeah, again, I go back to, you asked the question of what do I think they did absolutely right. They did the campus sites right. I just wish that they could have 2 rounds of that. I wish the teams that got the bye could also host. I think it would behoove those programs to be able to host. I feel like there's got to be a way we can figure out how to do this.
Well, I think that helps out with, say, like a team like Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Went to the Rose Bowl and the Cotton Bowl, and like they were going everywhere, all over the country, and got the one at home. But I agree with that. The campus sites, that to me is the biggest win in all of this, is that you got to have those. I'd love for it to be the first 2 rounds, so that everyone who is a higher seed gets to host. Also, it helps out overall with the cost with your fans trying to. Most likely, you've played in a conference championship game at that point. Mm-hmm. I know Ohio State and Notre Dame didn't. I also think what this expansion got right is you absolutely got the right teams. I know there was the discussion at the end of the 12 on mostly around Alabama.
Right.
On where do they fit in. And guess what? If there's not an upset in the Big 12 championship, Alabama's probably in. Like that they were able to sneak somebody in because of the way that played out. Mm-hmm. But you're now talking about 11, 12, 13, 14, instead of talking about this team went undefeated in the ACC, and yes, their quarterback is hurt, but they're going to be left out of the top 4. You're not getting that. Like, it is impossible to get that type of situation with your power teams. Mm-hmm. So to me, and of course, Boise State getting in, it was like you were looking at the group of 5. That's absolutely the one that you were saying they're the one that's most deserving to get in there after Army fell off down the stretch. And of course, Navy then kind of rubbing some salt in the wound late. But you got the right teams. I think the biggest thing that this missed on is that it showed a glaring error in the schedule. It showed how tough it is when you're starting in August and you're going through and you get to Thanksgiving weekend, and then you do conference championships, and then you do a week off for Army Navy and the start of bowl week. It's like, well, at some point you're either going to have to move up in August or eliminate conference championship games, or really they're going to have to get imaginative in the way they rework the schedule. I think that was just kind of an issue that was brought up or kind of shown the spotlight on with that, because it was frustrating that I'm fine with more football, but it taking until January 20th and the way everything got stretched out on top of transfer portal and everything else that in semester schedules, it was just really tough to see how that could all be navigated in a way that benefits everyone.
Yeah, and I can't believe I'm saying this, because I know you and I we're both college football heads here, but it was almost college football overload in a way, because we're creatures of habit. We're used to that second Monday in January having the standalone moment of the national championship game, and that's all that's going on that day. When this one finally hit, I don't know how many people realized it was on that Monday, because you had so many other things, both in the political world, but also in the sports world too. And we're also transitioning into NFL coaching searches as well, playoffs going on in the NFL as well. So it's almost like college football it almost outstayed its welcome, I think, with the public audience. And that's a tough thing for me to say. And I don't know if that's exactly why you saw the dwindling of numbers in the national championship game. I think there probably could have been a lot of factors for that, but it did seem like it was too much. It did seem like there was, as you're trying to hype up a national championship game, some of the top headlines in all the college football outlets were which transfers go into this place and which coach is going here. So it almost seemed like that matchup was kind of getting tamped down and going further down the actual area of importance when it came to the sport itself. So how you remedy that, I don't know exactly the answer to it, but I do think that consistency matters when it comes to the schedule. I think being able to, if there's some way they can have that standalone night for the national championship game, that's huge too. I think you're right too, Kaleb, about the schedule itself. If you're going to have to start it earlier, dare I say, do you shed a game? We love college football. We do not want to eliminate any games, but it has to live, I think, within a certain time frame before people, not us, but casual viewers are like, yeah, you know what? I've moved on. I moved on from the college football game. I watched maybe a couple playoff games. I'm good. I don't need to see that part of it. Another quick thing, and this is where I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because I found myself, this is where I get a little nitpicky on it. I'm watching the games, and I have the utmost respect for people who call the games, the personalities, what they bring to the table. But there's something about a college football playoff game that I want to be able to associate the voice I'm hearing to a big time matchup. And when it is controlled by just one entity of ESPN, ABC, I think Joe Tessitore does a great job. But when I think of Joe Tessitore, I'm not thinking big game right here. Can we possibly?
I'm thinking of a putt golf obstacle course. I'm sorry.
of a holy moly or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And then his failed attempt at Monday Night Football.
Yes.
I would love to see some way, and I know this is the battle of the broadcast rights on this, and we're talking about billions of dollars here. If at least in the opening round, we could have NBC get a crack at it with their A team, Fox get a crack at it with their A team. I would love to have Joel Klatt doing at least one college football playoff game. I would love to hear Noah Eagle doing one college football playoff game. I feel like the CBS, ABC, NBC should all have, and Fox should all have their opportunity at one college football playoff game. And if that's in the opening round, then ESPN, ABC takes over from then on. That's fine. I know it's nitpicky. It's how many people actually care about who they're listening to do the game. I do. I think it'd be cool for everybody to at least get one college football playoff game.
I agree. It's you got used to those voices on the big games, and then everything kind of got spread out in a way. Just get Nebraska into the playoff, and then we're listening to the Huskers Radio Network. That's
there we go. There we go.
You sync up on that. Last minute. So I'll just give you this, because I know we'll want to at some point, whether it's in the middle of spring, after spring, we get into the fall, and we know more of what the team looks like for this year. How far away is Nebraska football from being one of those 12? Is it 1-2? Is it 3-5? Is it 6+ on where this program is at being able to give Husker fans you're either hosting or you're going to a campus site for a college football playoff game?
And this is what the data tells us, right? You watched Ohio State, Nebraska play. Nebraska's right there. Nebraska has a chance to win that football game, and that's against the national champion. So Are they that far away? But then your eyes tell you, yeah, but also look at how they performed in some other games too, against UCLA, against USC. But I still believe 3-5. And this is why, Kaleb. We spent a good amount of time talking about how quickly you can dramatically transform your roster. And the fact that Nebraska has the resources to do that, and they have a head coach that understands that. I do think 3-5 is still tangible for Nebraska to put themselves into that position of at least being, whether it's a year that 4 Big Ten teams make it, Nebraska's the 4th team. Maybe Nebraska's has the Indiana type season. Yeah, I think 3-5 is tangible. 1-2 to me seems a little overly optimistic, but I don't think that they're so far back that, yeah, you're 6+. So I think 3-5.
Yeah, I think 1-2 is more likely than 6+, but 3-5 is kind of that sweet spot in the way that Matt Rhule has kind of built teams to progress and got to a bowl game. Can you finish in the top 25?
Right.
And then in the next year, can you build up? Maybe it's a big jump. Maybe it's just your top 20 or your top 15, and you're in the conversation.
Yeah.
So I like the direction that things have gone, and you've seen Matt Rhule go through his previous stops and kind of where those things are. We're going to cut it off there. Join us every Monday and Thursday, 9 to 10 o'clock. That's Nick Handley. I'm Kaleb Henry. Nick, do you have any sports nightly or anything coming up this week? We're not quite to baseball season yet where you'll really get into it.
Yeah, I think tonight we've got 1 hour. So we got a couple of coaches shows these next 2 days. So I think I am with Jessica 7 to 8, both tonight and tomorrow. Of course, we got basketball on Wednesday, so off then, and then just a small show. And I know that it's Women in Sports Day on Thursday, so I know Jessica. She's good. I think she's going to be on just for a half hour, but I know she's got some special interviews lined up. And also, don't forget this Thursday is Danny Busboom Kelly's introduction press conference too. So I don't know when exactly she's going to be on Sports Nightly, but I think I can tell you this, it's going to be this week. I just don't know if it'll be before the press conference or it'll be maybe the following day. So, yep, I will be on there as again, and I always want to take this time, and I know you echo these sentiments too, always thinking of our friend Greg Sharp and just hoping that he hangs in there and staying Sharpie strong.
Always. We will be back Thursday, 9 o'clock, right here on the HuskerMax YouTube page. You can get that. Subscribe to the HuskerMax YouTube channel, and also go to HuskerMax.com for everything you need Huskers. For Nick, I'm Kaleb. We'll talk to you guys next time. Go Big Red.